Welcome to Occult Mysticism, your journey into extraordinary realms. Today, we explore In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky, a captivating account of esoteric teachings and spiritual awakening. Join us as we seek these profound truths. Subscribe for more hidden wisdom. In the grand and often tumultuous chronicle of humanity's quest for meaning, there arise certain moments, certain junctures of thought and experience, which serve as landmarks for all subsequent generations of seekers. These are the moments when a teaching, long held in the esoteric sanctuaries of the world, breaks through the veil of ordinary life, offering to those who are prepared a glimpse into the staggering architecture of the cosmos and the equally staggering, though largely unrealized, potential of the human soul. Such a landmark, a veritable monolith in the landscape of 20th century spiritual philosophy, is the work bequeathed to us by Pyotr Demyanovich Ouspensky in his masterwork, In Search of the Miraculous. This is no mere book, it is a testament, a meticulously charted log of a perilous voyage into the unknown country of the self, undertaken in an age when the known world was itself dissolving into the chaos of war and revolution. Ouspensky, a mind already seasoned in the rigors of mathematics, journalism, and philosophical inquiry, a man who had already authored profound investigations into the nature of higher dimensions and the evolution of consciousness, found himself at an impasse. The formal systems of science and philosophy, with all their intricate theories and logical constructions, had proven themselves incapable of answering the deepest questions of existence. They could describe the outer shell of reality, but could not penetrate to its living heart. He felt, with an unshakable conviction, that beyond the thin and brittle film of consensus reality, there existed another, truer reality, a world of causes from which our world of effects was but a shadow. To find a way into this higher reality, to experience directly what he termed the miraculous, became the central imperative of his life. This was not a search for parlor tricks or psychic phenomena, but a quest for a school. Not an institution of academic learning, but a living, breathing repository of objective knowledge, a place where the perennial wisdom was not merely studied, but practiced, and where a man could be taught not what to believe, but how to be. His initial search took him, as it had taken so many before him, to the east, to the sands of Egypt and the temples of India and Ceylon, lands heavy with the perfume of ancient mysteries. And while he found there many fragments of truth, many echoes of a once great knowledge, he found no complete system, no living school that could satisfy the stringent demands of his prepared and critical intellect. He encountered devotional paths that required the surrender of the very reason he sought to illuminate. He found yogic schools that seemed to promise ecstatic states at the cost of worldly consciousness. He heard tales of hidden brotherhoods that demanded a complete renunciation of his life, his culture, and his own individual aims. He returned to Russia in the fateful year of 1914, his quest unfulfilled, his problem only deepened and made more complex. He returned to a world plunging headlong into the wild absurdity of the Great War, a cataclysm that seemed to mock all human aspirations towards reason and enlightenment. Yet, it was precisely in this darkening atmosphere, in a Moscow seething with the fevers of a dying empire, that his search was to reach its astonishing culmination. It was there, in the spring of 1915, that he was introduced to the enigmatic and compelling figure of Gurdjieff, a Caucasian Greek of obscure origins, a man who seemed a strange and anachronistic figure in a modern European city, yet who spoke with an authority and a precision that bespoke a knowledge of an entirely different order. The 8 years of intense discipleship that followed this meeting form the substance of In Search of the Miraculous. It is a work aptly subtitled Fragments of an Unknown Teaching, for what Ouspensky received was not a polished and completed doctrine, but a series of powerful interlocking ideas, each a fragment of a vast and ancient whole, each a key designed to be tested and verified through direct personal experience, and each intended to awaken the student from the profound and universal sleep in which all of humanity lives and dies. The teaching Gurdjieff imparted began not with lofty metaphysical speculations, but with a diagnosis of the human condition so direct, so unsparing, and so contrary to man's most cherished illusions about himself that it served as the first and most necessary shock on the path of awakening. Man, Gurdjieff declared with the finality of a scientific axiom, is a machine. This was not presented as a philosophical metaphor or a moral judgment, but as a statement of functional fact. Every action, every word, every thought, every feeling of an ordinary human being is merely a reaction. It is the result of external influences, a complex interplay of stimuli and ingrained response patterns. Nothing proceeds from a conscious, unified, and volitional self, for the simple reason that in ordinary man such a self does not exist. His belief that he can do, that he can be the conscious cause of his actions, is his most fundamental and tragic delusion. In reality, everything happens. A man is born, lives, and dies. He loves, hates, and desires, not as he wills, but as it happens within him, in much the same way that rain falls as a result of atmospheric changes or snow melts under the rays of the sun. This state of absolute mechanicalness is the prison in which all of humanity dwells. And the first, indispensable condition for any possibility of escape is the full, ruthless, and unsparing realization that one is, in fact, in prison. As long as a man believes himself to be free, as long as he imagines he possesses a real and permanent I and a functioning will, he has no chance whatever of liberation. His every aspiration, his every effort will only serve to strengthen the walls of his cell and to deepen the profound slumber from which he must awaken if he is to become what he was created to be. From this perspective, the great historical cataclysms, the wars and revolutions that convulse the life of humanity, are not aberrations or political failures. They are the inevitable and logical outcome of the actions of millions of sleeping machines attempting to annihilate millions of other sleeping machines, all the while justifying their unconscious movements with lofty words, patriotic slogans, and self-deceiving ideologies. Thus, the teaching did not begin, as so many others do, with promises of celestial bliss or supernatural powers. It began with the brutal, humbling, and absolutely necessary task of seeing oneself as one truly is: an automaton, a puppet pulled by 1,000 invisible strings, a being wholly without responsibility, because a machine, by its very nature, cannot be responsible. Only a man, Gurdjieff affirmed, can be responsible. And to become a man, in the true and full sense of that word, is the sole and ultimate purpose of the work. From this stark and uncompromising foundation, the system unfolds with an astonishing and impeccable logic, revealing not only the nature of the prison, but the precise and practical means of escape. Gurdjieff presented a comprehensive map of this path in his teaching of the Four Ways, which he described as the traditional routes to spiritual evolution known to humanity throughout its history. The first is the way of the fakir, the path of relentless struggle with the physical body. Through years of immense physical suffering and the systematic torture of the flesh, the fakir develops a phenomenal power over the body, a physical will that can overcome any pain or instinct. It is a long, arduous, and uncertain path, a work conducted entirely within the first of man's inner rooms, the physical organism. But it leaves the emotional and intellectual functions utterly undeveloped. The fakir acquires a tremendous will, but has nothing to apply it to. He has mastered his carriage, but has neither horse nor driver. The second is the way of the monk, the path of faith, devotion, and religious feeling. Through constant prayer, ascetic practices, and profound sacrifice, the monk subjects all his other emotions to the single, overwhelming emotion of faith in God. He thereby develops a powerful unity in his emotional center and an unshakable will over his feelings. This is a struggle waged in the second room of the house, the emotional nature. Yet it leaves the body and the mind in their original, undeveloped state. He has mastered the horse, but his carriage is weak and his driver is uneducated. The third is the way of the yogi, the path of knowledge and the discipline of the mind. Through intense mental concentration, the study of philosophy, and the mastery of intricate psychic exercises, the yogi develops his intellectual capacities to their highest possible degree, achieving complete mastery over the third room, the mind. He may come to know everything that is possible for a man to know, but remain unable to do anything, for his physical body and his emotional nature may be as undeveloped as those of an ordinary man. He is a perfect driver, but his horse is untrained and his carriage is in disrepair. Each of these three traditional ways is characterized by one absolute demand: a complete and total renunciation of the world. The fakir must go into the desert, the monk into the monastery, the yogi into his secluded school. All must die to ordinary life from the very first step. But, Gurdjieff explained, there exists a fourth way, a path less known and without permanent institutions, a way that appears and disappears in history according to specific cosmic needs. This fourth way does not demand that a man retire from the world. On the contrary, it is a way that must be followed in the very midst of ordinary life, using the conditions of that life as the material for its work. The conditions in which a man finds himself at the beginning of his search are the best possible for him, for they are the direct reflection of what he is. The fourth way is often called the way of the sly man, so called because he knows a secret which the fakir, the monk, and the yogi do not know. This secret is that it is possible to work on all three centers, the physical, the emotional, and the intellectual, simultaneously. By making use of a certain specific knowledge that is inaccessible to the other ways, the student of the fourth way can undertake a balanced and harmonious development, working on all three rooms of his house at once. Its principal and most insistent demand is for understanding. A man must do nothing that he does not understand, except as a temporary experiment under the direct guidance of his teacher. The results of his work are always in direct proportion to the consciousness of his work. No blind faith is required, only a provisional trust until he can verify the teachings through his own direct and unmediated experience. This way, then, is a path of accelerated evolution, a means by which a man can work towards the creation of what the teaching calls the higher bodies, towards the attainment of what is commonly and often mistakenly called immortality, all while remaining fully engaged with the duties, the responsibilities, and the demands of his everyday existence. To comprehend this possibility of simultaneous work, it was first necessary to understand the true and complex structure of the human machine. As has been stated, man is not a unified whole, he is a multiplicity. The deeply ingrained illusion of possessing a single, permanent, and indivisible I is the second great delusion after the illusion of being able to do. In reality, man is a legion of small, contradictory, and perpetually warring I's. One I makes a solemn decision in the morning, but it is an entirely different I that is called upon to carry it out in the afternoon, an I that may know nothing whatever of the original decision and possess absolutely no desire to fulfill it. This inner fragmentation explains the perpetual state of inner conflict, the endless cycle of broken resolutions, and the fundamental disunity that characterizes our inner world. These numberless and ephemeral I's are not governed by any central will, but are called forth in a purely mechanical fashion by accidental external influences. A change in the weather, a chance remark overheard in the street, a pleasant or unpleasant memory rising from the depths of association. Each of these can bring an entirely different group of I's to the surface of consciousness, and each of these I's in its turn claims to be the whole man, the master of the house. In truth, there is no master in the house, only a chaotic multitude of servants, each one usurping the master's throne for a fleeting moment. This psychological multiplicity is organized around several distinct minds, or centers, each possessing its own particular sphere of activity, its own unique form of memory, and its own special kind of intelligence. The teaching first defined three principal centers: the intellectual, the emotional, and the moving. To these was added the instinctive center, which governs all the internal organic functions of the body, such as digestion, respiration, and circulation. The intellectual center is the apparatus of reason. It compares, it calculates, it forms concepts and constructs theories. The emotional center is the apparatus of feeling. It experiences the entire spectrum of human emotion, from liking and disliking to profound joy and deep sorrow. The moving center is the apparatus that controls all the external movements of the body, from the simple act of walking to the complex and highly learned postures of a craftsman, a dancer, or an athlete. In a perfectly balanced and developed man, each of these centers would perform its own proper work, the work for which it is best suited by nature. But in the ordinary mechanical man, the centers are in a state of profound and perpetual chaos. They constantly usurp one another's functions, a condition which the system terms the wrong work of centers. The emotional center, for example, attempts to think, leading to hurried, anxious, and illogical conclusions. The thinking center, in its turn, tries to feel, interposing its slow, cold, and deliberative process into situations that require an immediate and warm emotional response, rendering the man indecisive and seemingly heartless. The moving center attempts to think and feel, resulting in purely mechanical speech, rote learning without understanding, and purely imitative emotional reactions that lack any genuine inner content. An enormous portion of the finite energy of the human machine is squandered in this ceaseless wrong work, and especially in the uncontrolled and fantastically wasteful activity of imagination and daydreaming, which are the very antithesis of directed, conscious thought. The first practical and essential task of self-study, therefore, is the practice of rigorous self-observation, to watch impartially and without judgment the ceaseless workings of this inner machine, and to learn, through direct experience, to discriminate between the functions of the different centers, to see with clarity which center is speaking or acting at any given moment. This is the beginning of the great work of knowing oneself. This initial psychological framework was then vastly expanded and deepened by the introduction of two fundamental cosmic laws, laws that were said to govern every process in the universe, from the creation of distant galaxies and the formation of solar systems to the most intimate details of the inner life of man. The first of these is the law of three forces, or the law of three principles. This law states that every phenomenon, without any exception, on whatever scale it may occur, is the result of the meeting and interaction of three distinct and independent forces, one which is active or positive, one which is passive or negative, and a third which is neutralizing. Our ordinary dualistic science recognizes the opposition of two forces, the familiar polarity of positive and negative, but it fails entirely to see the absolute necessity of the third. The teaching asserts that without the intervention of this third, neutralizing force, the first two forces would either remain in a state of perpetual opposition, balancing one another indefinitely, or they would simply neutralize each other, in either case producing no tangible result, no new phenomenon. We consistently fail to perceive this third force directly because of the inherent limitations of our subjective state of consciousness, but its action can be observed everywhere in its results. The great religions and philosophical systems of the past embodied this profound knowledge in their central conceptions of the Trinity, the Trimurti of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva in the Hindu tradition, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost of Christianity. In the Absolute, or God, these three forces constitute a single, indivisible, and fully conscious whole, possessing a single will. But as these forces manifest downwards through the successive levels of creation, they become divided, and their interactions become progressively more mechanical and subject to the law of accident. The second fundamental law is the law of seven, or the law of octaves. This law governs the development and progression of all processes in time. It states that all vibrations, all lines of force, do not develop in a uniform, continuous, and linear fashion, but with definite and predictable periods of acceleration and retardation. A process, once initiated, develops in its original direction only for a certain period of time. Then, at a definite and mathematically determined point, a deviation inevitably occurs. This law is perfectly and completely represented in the seven-tone musical scale. The progression of the notes do, re, mi proceeds in what may be considered a straight line of increasing vibration, but between the notes mi and fa, there is a necessary and unavoidable retardation, a gap, or an interval. If this interval is not filled by an additional shock, that is, by the intervention of an outside force of a corresponding nature, the line of the development of vibrations will inevitably change its direction. It will continue its progression through the notes fa, sol, la, si, but now at a definite angle to its original course. Between the note si and the do of the next higher octave, another, greater interval occurs, one which requires a still stronger and more powerful shock if the process is to continue in its original direction. In the absence of these necessary shocks, any activity we begin, any intention we form, any movement we initiate will unavoidably deviate from its intended course and, if it continues long enough, will eventually turn into its very own opposite. Sincere movements for freedom become the most brutal of tyrannies. Religions founded on principles of love and compassion become the instruments of merciless persecution, and the personal resolutions of an individual to better himself become, through this unseen deviation, the source of new and more subtle forms of self-deception. This law explains, with a terrible and beautiful clarity, why there are no straight lines in nature or in our lives, why everything happens in a way that we do not expect, and why our most sincere and powerful efforts so often come to nothing. It is the universal law of unavoidable deviation, the law that governs every unfolding process. These two great and fundamental laws of 3 and 7 find their ultimate synthesis and visual expression in the cosmological diagram which the teaching calls the ray of creation. This remarkable diagram depicts the entire universe as a vast, descending octave, an immense scale of vibrations beginning from the absolute, or all, and proceeding downwards through successive and cascading levels of increasing density, increasing multiplicity of laws, and therefore increasing mechanicalness. The absolute, the unmanifest source of all, is the note do. From its own single and conscious will, it creates all worlds, which is the note C. The interval between this primordial do and C is filled by the direct and conscious action of the will of the Absolute itself. All worlds, in its turn, becomes the source for the next level. All suns, which is our Milky Way, the note La. This great stellar world then gives birth to our own sun and its solar system, which is the note Sol. The sun, in its turn, creates the world of all the planets within its system, which is the note Fa. From the planetary world comes our own Earth, which is the note Mi. And from the Earth proceeds the moon, which is the note Re. Between the level of the planets Phi and our Earth Mi, there occurs the first cosmic interval in the ray's descent, where the original impulse is no longer sufficient to bridge the gap. At this precise point, nature has created a special shock absorber, an intricate and sensitive transmitting station for planetary forces designed to enable the ray of creation to continue its development. This transmitting station is organic life on Earth. It is a sensitive and living film that covers the entire terrestrial globe, and it was created for the express purpose of receiving and transmitting to the Earth the higher influences from the planetary world, influences which the Earth, by itself, would be unable to receive. Organic life, therefore, including humanity, serves a vast and dual cosmic purpose. First, it transmits the energies and influences necessary for the continuing evolution of the Earth itself. And second, it serves as food for the growing and developing moon. The moon is the growing end of the cosmic branch, a planet still in the process of being born, a world in formation. Every living thing on Earth, plant, animal, and man, upon its death, releases a certain quantity of fine, vital energy which is drawn to the moon, contributing to its growth, its warmth, and its eventual maturation. Man, therefore, finds his place as a part of this immense cosmic machine, an infinitesimal but necessary cog serving purposes that lie far beyond his own personal existence and comprehension. He is subject to a multiplicity of laws, the 48 separate orders of laws that govern life on Earth, the 24 of the planetary world, the 12 of the sun, and so on, up to the single law which is the will of the Absolute. To evolve, for man, means to come under the influence of progressively fewer and higher laws. To become free, in a cosmic sense, means to escape from the direct and overwhelming power of the moon, which is the immediate governor and motive force of all mechanical life and all mechanical happenings on the surface of the Earth. The entire cosmic process, from the Absolute down to the moon, can be understood as an immense and continuous alchemical factory, a process of transmutation that transforms the finest and most subtle matters into progressively coarser and denser ones in the great descending or involutionary octave of creation. The direct and practical corollary to this vast cosmic alchemy is the process of inner alchemy that is possible within the organism of man himself. For the human organism is also a three-storied factory, a perfect microcosm that reflects in every detail the laws and the structure of the macrocosm. It is a laboratory designed for the transformation of substances, receiving and processing three distinct kinds of food. The first, and coarsest, is the ordinary physical food and drink that enters the lower story of the body. The second is the air we breathe, which enters the middle story. The third, and by far the most important and the finest, is the food of impressions, which enters the upper story through our senses. The transformation of these three kinds of substances within the human organism also follows with absolute precision the immutable law of octaves. The first food, entering the lower story of the body, begins its octave of digestion. It develops through its successive stages until it reaches the note Mi, where its progress is arrested by an interval. At this precise point, the second food, air, enters the middle story of the factory, providing the necessary additional shock that allows the food octave to continue its complex development, ultimately producing the finer substances needed for the body's life and psychic functions. The air octave, in its turn, begins its own process of transformation, developing until it too reaches an interval at its own note Mi, where its progress comes to a complete halt. Finally, the third food, the food of impressions, enters the upper story as the note Do, but in the ordinary sleeping state of man, this octave does not develop at all. Its immensely potent energy is simply dissipated, wasted in mechanical reactions and associative daydreaming. The entire output of the factory in this normal state of sleep is minimal. All the finer and more precious substances it produces are immediately and completely consumed simply to maintain the day-to-day life of the machine. Herein lies the profound secret of the fourth way's practical, verifiable work. Gurdjieff taught that it is possible for a man, through a specific and conscious effort, to create a volitional shock at the very point where the octave of impressions enters the organism. This shock is the conscious act of self-remembering. In an ordinary state, when a man sees a tree, there is but a single impression, the tree. He is lost in the perception. But if, at that precise moment, he remembers himself, if he is aware not only of the tree but of the I who is seeing the tree, the impression is immediately and powerfully doubled. This conscious and volitional act of dividing the attention provides the exact quality of energy, the precise additional shock, that is necessary for the octave of impressions to begin its own process of development and transformation. Furthermore, this same conscious shock provides the necessary energy for the air octave to pass its own interval and develop further, producing substances of a much finer quality than is possible in the ordinary state. By this specific and repeatable method, the human factory can begin to produce a great and consistent surplus of the finer hydrogens, the precise alchemical term used in the system for the different levels and densities of energy matter, which are the very substances necessary for the formation and the subsequent nourishment of the higher, or astral, body. This is the concrete beginning of conscious evolution, the practical and verifiable path of inner transmutation, the great hermetic work of turning the base metals of our ordinary thoughts and feelings into the pure gold of a higher and more permanent state of being, not in some external and mythical retort, but within the living and breathing laboratory of the human organism itself. The chief and most pervasive obstacle to the practice of self-remembering, and therefore to this entire magnificent process of inner transmutation, is the ubiquitous psychological state which the teaching calls identification. To identify means to be completely absorbed in and merged with whatever happens to hold one's attention at any given moment, a thought, a feeling, an external object, an interesting conversation. When a man is in a state of identification, he is not present. Only the object of his identification exists for him. He utterly forgets himself. He forgets his aim. He becomes a passive and powerless reflection of the world around him, a mirror for fleeting impressions. This state is the very essence and the primary characteristic of psychological sleep. A particularly pervasive and energy-draining form of identification is what Gurdjieff termed considering. He described two kinds of considering, one entirely mechanical and the other potentially conscious. Internal considering is the state of constant and agonizing inner preoccupation with what other people think of one, a perpetual state of feeling oneself undervalued, misunderstood, insulted, or offended. It is a psychological condition rooted in utterly fantastic and childish requirements of how others should treat one, and it is based on a deeply inflated and wholly imaginary sense of one's own importance. This state consumes an almost unbelievable amount of vital energy in useless and painful suspicion, morbid guesswork, and a whole host of negative emotions. External considering, by contrast, is a conscious and volitional act of putting oneself in another person's position, of understanding their point of view, their ingrained habits, and their particular prejudices. It is not an act of weakness or subservience, but a conscious and intelligent act of adaptation, a practical means of avoiding unnecessary friction and of making life easier and more harmonious for oneself and for others. In order to struggle effectively against the hypnotic power of identification and internal considering, one must not be afraid of being insincere in the conventional, sentimental sense. What is commonly called sincerity is, in most cases, merely the mechanical and uncontrolled inability to restrain the expression of one's negative moods and selfish impulses. True sincerity begins with the conscious and difficult struggle against this very mechanicalness. To protect man from the constant and unbearable friction of his own inner contradictions, nature and education create within his psyche a complex and deeply rooted system of artificial shock absorbers, which the teaching calls buffers. These are the ingrained and often unconscious habits of thought and feeling that prevent a man from seeing two contradictory sides of himself at the same time. A man may, for example, consider himself to be a profoundly devout Christian, yet behave with ruthless and unprincipled cruelty in his business affairs. A powerful buffer prevents him from ever noticing or feeling the absolute incompatibility of these two sides of his nature. Buffers make life psychologically easy and comfortable. They are the ingenious mechanisms that allow a man always to be in the right in his own eyes, to justify any action, and to sleep peacefully. But they are the greatest of all obstacles to inner development and awakening. for it is only through the intense and painful friction caused by the conscious and direct realization of one's own inner contradictions that the inner fire needed for the fusion of the self, or transmutation, can ever be kindled. The deliberate and systematic destruction of buffers is therefore a long, arduous, and often painful process, for it means going out to meet willingly all those inner sufferings and psychological discomforts that one has spent a lifetime avoiding. This process is synonymous with the awakening of conscience. Conscience, in this teaching, has nothing whatever to do with conventional or culturally conditioned morality, which is itself merely a system of collective and socially approved buffers. Conscience is the direct, unmediated, and simultaneous feeling of all of one's contradictory highs, the profound shame and the salutary horror of seeing oneself at last as one truly is. A man cannot live in this state for long. He must either destroy the contradictions or destroy conscience. The great work of the fourth way is to learn how to bear the purifying fire of an awakening conscience, for this fire alone has the power to fuse the chaotic multiplicity of I's into one single, indivisible, and permanent whole. In the course of this profound teaching, Ouspensky's narrative documents with unflinching honesty not only the systematic exposition of these powerful and transformative ideas, but also the practical life of the group as it moved through the gathering chaos of revolutionary Russia, from the deceptive calm of St. Petersburg to the final, desperate flight from the Caucasus. The system was never presented as an abstract philosophy to be discussed in comfortable armchairs, but as a living, breathing, and intensely practical reality, a body of knowledge that had to be tested and verified against the harshest and most demanding conditions imaginable. Gurdjieff's methods were often shocking, deliberately paradoxical, and seemingly contradictory, designed with surgical precision to break down the deeply ingrained habits and the powerful buffers of his pupils. The famous stop exercise, in which, at a sudden and unexpected command from the teacher, everyone had to freeze instantly in whatever posture they happened to be, was a powerful and unforgettable tool for revealing the absolute automatism of the body, and for developing at the same time the dormant powers of will and self-remembering. The biographical portions of the book, particularly the intense period of work in Ouspensky and Ouspensky's eventual, painful, and difficult decision to separate from his teacher, are not mere anecdotes but an integral and essential part of the teaching itself. They demonstrate with poignant clarity the immense personal difficulties, the profound inner struggles, and the constant and necessary re-evaluation that are required on the path of the fourth way. Ouspensky's final separation was not a rejection of the system or a sign of its failure. On the contrary, it was the ultimate proof of its success. It was the system itself that had given him the inner strength, the clarity of purpose, and the independent center of gravity necessary to make such a difficult and self-reliant decision. He realized, with the hard-won clarity that comes only from sincere and prolonged effort, that for him, the next essential step on his own unique path required him to work independently, to assimilate what he had learned through his own being, and to present it in a form that his own essence could verify and express. The system had given him the very tools he needed to stand at last upon his own feet. It had truly become a Noah's Ark, a vessel of objective knowledge that had carried him and his companions safely through the terrifying flood of a collapsing civilization, preserving for a future and unknown time the precious and life-giving seeds of a knowledge that might otherwise have been utterly and irretrievably lost to the world. Thus, In Search of the Miraculous concludes not with a final and definitive answer to the questions of life, but with the opening of a door onto a new and vaster landscape of possibility. It is a work that stands as a powerful and enduring challenge to the most fundamental and unquestioned assumptions of our modern civilization: the complacent assumption of consciousness, the naive belief in an inevitable and mechanical progress, the comforting conviction that man is the master of his own destiny. It reveals a universe far more complex, more purposeful, more interconnected, and infinitely more meaningful than the one described by conventional, materialistic science. And it reveals a human being with dormant possibilities far greater and more magnificent than those imagined by conventional, superficial psychology. The fragments of an unknown teaching, which Ouspensky so painstakingly and so faithfully recorded for posterity, form a coherent, logical, and supremely practical guide for those individuals who are no longer satisfied with the hollow answers provided by ordinary life, for those who feel the deep and persistent disquiet of knowing that they are asleep and who possess, above all else, the burning and unquenchable desire to awaken. The book is not an end, but a beginning. It is at once a map, a compass, and a solemn warning. It shows with undeniable clarity the existence of a path to a higher reality. It indicates with scientific precision the direction one must take, and it makes clear with an uncompromising and salutary honesty the immense difficulties, the necessary sacrifices, and the unceasing conscious effort that are required to travel it. For the earnest and prepared seeker, for the one who has truly become disappointed in all ordinary ways and who is ready to pay the price for real knowledge, it remains an indispensable and luminous testament to the living reality of another order of knowledge and to the enduring and glorious possibility for man, the machine, to become man, the conscious being, to cease at last from merely happening, and to begin, at last, to truly do. Thank you for joining us on In Search of the Miraculous with Occult Mysticism. Share your reflections below and connect with our community. Like, subscribe, and tap the bell for more spiritual insights. Until next time, keep searching the miraculous.